Hey friends, this is part 2, chapter 5 of 1984.
You and I buy star maps and drive my car around Los Angeles. You and I buy star maps and ding dong ditch a televangelist.
I feel like there's a few things that I need to get off my chest. As I mentioned, I think at the beginning of the last video, that my wife and I recently had our second child, and I probably made a point in saying that I'm on no sleep, and I'm on even less sleep. And so a couple of things have occurred to me since I'm up at all hours of the night, and up maybe every 3 hours on the hour. And so here are some things that have occurred to me. And one of the things is, what is the deal with people? If I order a package or food, what is the deal with people dropping it off on my door and then running to their cars, as if I have the ability to shoot the coronavirus at them like a bullet? And I can see them on my Ring doorbell. They drop it off, and they extend their arm out. They drop it off, and then they run to their cars, as if I can infect them somehow. And in any case, I think that's so weird. Another thing that I realized is that if somebody has to tell you they're a professional, chances are they're not a professional. Okay, and that's maybe just a piece of advice that you take with you. So you're not only learning about 1984, but you get to learn some life lessons along the way. And here's my example. I think it was our video, and if it's not, then I'm embarrassed. But I think it was our last video review, and I mentioned about how I wanted to get the inside of my nose waxed, but that it's super unsafe, I guess, to do that. And so I was talking to my wife about it, and she says, well, if you want it done so badly, why don't I just order the wax and I'll just do it here? And I said, no, I don't feel comfortable with that. And then she said, well, don't worry, I'm a professional. And I said, you know what? If somebody has to tell you they're a professional, they're not a professional, right? So that was something that occurred to me. So take that as a life lesson. Anybody that has to say that to you, probably not the case. And she's definitely not a nose waxing professional, if someone like that even exists. And the last thing that I wanted to bring to your attention is what is it with all of the Instagram stories about doing a handstand and putting a shirt on, or the 30-day challenge of, like, what's a song that you like that has a number in it, or like photos of people sitting by a lake, and then it has the caption, "Stay home." Tell me about that. Anyway, it clogs up my feed. It clogs up my IG stories. I want to see two things. Sports, first of all. And if I'm in a playful mood, maybe pictures of your cats or something. I don't really like cats, but pictures of your animals or something. And that's pretty much it. Otherwise, change it. So yeah, those are some things that have been on my mind, and so let's get into it. So this is part 2. chapter 5 of 1984, and I was looking at the slides just before starting this video, and I realized that there's a lot of like smaller important things that happen in the chapter that I don't have the slides for, which I should create the slides for them, but I'm not going to do that. And so I'll mention those like little things as we're going through. And yeah, so let's take a look at the first slide. What do I got? Oh yeah, okay. So just like Winston predicted in part 1, chapter 5, that at the beginning of that chapter, that Syme would be eventually vaporized because he's too smart of a character. He's too intelligent. And so you'll have to look back in your notes about Syme. I won't tell you everything about him because that's your responsibility. But Syme is a philologist. He studies Newspeak, and he works on the Newspeak dictionary. And the way that we talked about him as a class before all this coronavirus craziness stuff happened, we talked about Syme being a character who realizes what Big Brother is doing in terms of brainwashing the people. It just so happens that he's in favor of it. And so Winston makes the comment that Syme speaks too plainly and he's too intelligent, and one day he will be vaporized. And we have come to that point where Syme one day is just gone, and his name doesn't appear anywhere, and he is just gone. So Winston was right about that. So that's pretty big. In the background, we haven't talked about this for a long time, is the preparation for Hate Week. Not the 2 Minutes Hate, but Hate Week. And there's a lot of preparation going on in the background for this celebratory week of hating the enemy. And part of their preparation is these. Of course, there's going to be banners and slogans and songs and parades and decorating apartment buildings and all that kind of stuff. But one of the more prominent symbols of this celebration is this propaganda poster of a Eurasian soldier pointing the gun straight ahead. And so, as you can see up on the slide, that it's very similar to the Uncle Sam poster from World War I and II. I think it's from both wars. The enlisting poster, Uncle Sam talking to whoever's looking at the poster to say, I want you to join the army. And so in a very similar way, the propaganda that's used by Oceania, or used by Big Brother here, is to have the Eurasian soldier, the enemy, pointing the gun straight ahead, so that anybody looking at the poster will know that they themselves are the target of these people. And so yeah, and then if you look in the course pack, if you're interested, I won't assign it, but if you're interested, is to go to part 2, chapter 5, and there's an activity in there that helps you kind of separate or categorize what's an advertisement versus what's propaganda, because they are very different with very different purposes. And so you can go and complete that activity if you find it helpful. What else? On the next slide is the very sort of quick commentary on Mr. Charrington, where we know that what's starting to happen to Winston, first of all, is that he is starting to get healthier, and not only physically but mentally as well. And of course, we can attribute that to his relationship with Julia, that gives him new meaning in life. And what I put up on this slide, is a photograph of Winston and Mr. Charrington from the 1984 film, as well as two extinct creatures, the top right being a dodo bird and the bottom left being dinosaurs. And the reason why I put those in there is because of this particular quote where it says the room was a world, a pocket of the past. And they're talking about, of course, the room above Mr. Charrington's shop where Winston and Julia rent. It says where extinct animals could walk, and Mr. Charrington thought Winston was another extinct animal. And so the comment here, of course, Winston thinking that Mr. Charrington is an extinct animal, is that because people like Mr. Charrington, who value privacy, who are allowing Winston and Julia to rent the room above his shop to do whatever it is that they want to do, those kinds of people aren't around anymore. And so maybe I always say that maybe a more appropriate term is to refer to Mr. Charrington as an endangered animal on the verge of extinction, but instead Winston thinks of Mr. Charrington as being extinct rather than endangered. So I think that was it for that. And then where I wanted to spend the majority of time was talking about the conversation between Winston and Julia in the room above Mr. Charrington's shop. Some of the things that they talk about that will lead us towards the end of the chapter. And so before we kind of talk about what's up on the slide is, first of all, one of the things that they talk about, or one of the things maybe I should say that Winston mentions to Julia, is that, of course, his belief that O'Brien is somebody that they would be able to trust. And Winston explains to Julia that where he's getting that belief from, that O'Brien is on his side, is by a single flash of the eyes, which, of course, we were introduced to in Part 1, Chapter 1. And Julia, and we shouldn't be surprised by this, Julia doesn't think that Winston's crazy for believing that a single flash of the eyes could indicate that somebody is trustworthy, and the reason why it shouldn't escape you that that's how Julia figured out that Winston was somebody that could be trusted by just looking at him and figuring it out. And so when Winston turns to Julia and says that he believes that O'Brien is trustworthy just by looking at him, she doesn't think that that's such a crazy idea. Another thing that Julia mentions, which is surprising to Winston, are two things. Number one is she doesn't believe that the Brotherhood exists. This underground rebellious group led by Emmanuel Goldstein with the aim to take down Big Brother. She doesn't believe that the Brotherhood exists, which is really shocking to Winston. And the second thing that's shocking to Winston that Julia says is that she actually tells Winston that perhaps there's not a war happening at all, and that the bombs that are being dropped on the proletarian district are being dropped by Big Brother themselves, or himself, or herself, because we don't know who Big Brother is. But that essentially Oceania is bombing its own people. And that's really surprising to Winston, because he had never even considered that kind of conspiracy-like thinking before. And if you follow Julia's train of thought in terms of what Big Brother would gain by doing that, is they really gain, I would say the biggest gain is that you unify the people by making it seem like the war is perpetual, like it's just constant, and it's always happening in the background. And if people are constantly fearful, they will constantly have a need for Big Brother's protection. And by bombing the proletarian district, we know how the outer and inner party view the proles as animals, and so you end up, even if you kill a couple thousand proles, you haven't caused any harm. You haven't caused any harm to anybody that matters in the eyes of Big Brother. You haven't harmed any real citizens. So you keep the idea of the war alive, constant, and you also, and you also are bombing an area that really doesn't have any kind of impact on Big Brother or the regime or the government in general, because of where you're bombing. And so again, that thought is very shocking to Winston. And then one of the last things I think that they talk about is this idea of Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford, which of course you should know the story by now with the photograph and all that. And Winston tells that story to Julia and says that he held that photograph in his hands. And she doesn't really understand or doesn't grasp the significance of that moment, which is so important to Winston, but she doesn't really seem to understand it. And she actually asks Winston, what, were they friends of yours or something, right? She just doesn't understand. And he says, no, you've missed the point. I had it in my hands, unmistakable proof that the government's lying. And she doesn't really see, she just doesn't see the significance of that. And it kind of angers Winston to the point where he says to Julia, you're only a rebel from the waist downwards. And that's Winston's way of insulting Julia, to say that you only know how to rebel with your sexuality, with your body, as opposed to your brains, as opposed to using some sort of intellect, which is supposed to be insulting to Julia, and she actually finds it quite comical. So comical, in fact, that I think she actually ends up kind of hugging Winston really, really tightly and kind of playfully laughing about it. So I thought I would kind of end off with this really important slide here about their end game. And by end game, I really mean the goal, the end result for both Winston and Julia. And what I mean by that is to say, what are they hoping to accomplish? By the end of all of this, what are they hoping to gain? What are they hoping to accomplish? And I think I referenced it in a previous video to say that their end games are very different from one another. And that's problematic, especially if they're planning on working together to take down Big Brother. And so I've put up on the slide, of course, the way that you can kind of see their goal, what it is that they hope to achieve. And what Winston hopes to achieve is, before, of course, he's captured, tortured, and killed, which they believe that process has already begun, is he wants to help the next generation of rebels. He wants to be part of, be part of the process of taking down Big Brother. Winston himself knows he's probably not going to see the fall of Big Brother in his lifetime. He just wants to be part of the process so he can die knowing that he was, a bit of a trailblazer. So he wants to help out the future generations. Julia, on the other hand, is somebody who is, who maybe one would consider more selfish. Is she's not interested in future generations. She's not interested in helping out, people from 5 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years, or 100 years from now. She's only interested in making it to the end of the day. She's interested in making sure that she stays alive. She does say, I'm also interested in you, meaning Winston. She's interested in Winston staying alive. And all she really wants to do is rebel in these kind of small, somewhat insignificant ways, and then just stay alive to make it to the next day. So that's why she uses sex as a way to rebel against the government. It's something really, really small. She gets away with it. She makes it to the end of the day, and she starts all over again the next day. That's not good enough for Winston, right? That doesn't accomplish anything. He wants to have a bigger impact. And of course, this all goes back to that dream that he had about his mother and his baby sister dying in the sinking ship, right? The weight on his shoulders to do something with his life, not just sit back. So I guess I'll end by saying that one of them is going to have to make a decision, because with having two very different end goals, it makes working together seemingly impossible. So either Winston is going to have to just kind of give up and, make it to the end of the day just like Julia, or Julia is going to have to make a decision for herself, to say, okay, you know what, I do want to be part of something bigger and greater. I do want to make an impact on future generations, and I will work alongside Winston. So it's either they go their separate ways, or one of them is going to have to make a decision to give up their own end game and join the other person's. So I think that's it for the chapter, and I know I say this every single time, but you know how to reach me in case you have other questions or you feel like I did maybe gloss over something that you wish I would have spent a little bit more time on. So until next time.
Ding dong, did you tell Evangelist?